For the rest of the show, we're going to be looking at some legal stories, and they really run the gamut. But we begin with the Russia probe. At the direction of Special Counsel Bob Mueller, the FBI, we've learned, has raided the home of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. They went into the Northern Virginia home looking for tax documents and foreign banking records, that according to the New York Times. Search carried out soon after Manafort had met with the Senate Intelligence Committee a couple of weeks ago. Manafort, he was at that Trump Tower meeting with Donald Trump Jr. and also Jared Kushner, with the Russians, of course, last year. Donnie Jr. reportedly was promised dirt on Hillary Clinton. Manafort also reportedly has a $17 million debt to Russian interests. The Times uncovered it by obtaining documents from Cyprus, a known tax haven. Manafort is connected to a tangled web of shell companies from his work in Ukraine with pro-Russia parties. Fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, he's also getting a lot of attention from Mr. Mueller. Investigators, they've asked the White House for documents relating to Flynn, and they've also questioned people about whether Flynn was secretly paid by the Turkish government during the presidential campaign. Now that expands the probe into Flynn beyond just Russia. All that happening as we also learn that Mueller is looking into Trump's finances. Now you remember when Trump said that there was a red line that he shouldn't and wouldn't tolerate if they crossed, which was into the money? Well, we also know a grand jury has been impaneled to look into the whole mess. So to unpack some of that, let's bring in our friends here. A couple of attorneys, Jim Kasuris, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan. He sits on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. Bill Aronwald, defense attorney, former assistant U.S. attorney, gracing us with his presence from sunny Florida. Okay, Bill, why? Why would, in effect, just like I've seen in Law and Order, they come knocking on the door with a warrant and they search the house when the day before Manafort had been testifying to Senate committees that, you know, what do you think, if you have to divine here, would Mueller and friends say either he's not being cooperative or we're worried from a timing standpoint that papers could disappear?
Well, the question assumes that there is some exchanging of information between Mueller's group and between the Senate Intelligence Committee or the House Intelligence Committee. And, based upon my experience, there often is not that degree of cooperation between, different agencies, on parallel tracks of an investigation. But, and saying that, the other thing you need to consider is it's not just getting a warrant. You have to go through a process to get a warrant. You have to go to a judge. A judge is the one that issues a warrant. Mueller doesn't have the authority to just issue a warrant himself. So he has to go to a judge. When he goes to a judge, he's got to present an application. He's got to lay out facts that convince that judge that there's probable cause to believe that evidence of a crime will be found within the documents and records that are the object of the warrant. And the judge was then asked to issue a warrant authorizing the search of any premises within which those documents are likely to be found. And
also, Bill, does, in this case, Mueller's team have to convince a judge that simply asking wouldn't be enough, that if they ask, there's a fear that that evidence could be compromised?
That's when I was with the government, we never made the mistake of asking for documents, rather than getting a warrant. If we felt we had enough information to get a warrant, that's the step we're going to take. And the element of surprise is always on the law enforcement side. So and they executed the warrant very early in the morning. They gave them no advance notice. This was a no-knock warrant, which is even more extreme than the traditional warrant.
Explain what that means.
Well, no-knock warrant means basically they don't have to knock and announce their presence. If they want to, they can just break the door down and go in. So in this particular situation, I think what's important for everybody to realize is that these warrants are not just issued willy-nilly. Judges have a solemn responsibility to review the application and make sure that it meets the threshold necessary to establish probable cause. Now, we don't know what documents were the specific object of the search warrant, but the fact of the matter is just the fact that Mueller is interested in them and looking for those documents, what he's trying to do right now is he's trying to get as much information as he can and then connect the dots. That's what he's really trying to do.
And from the layperson here, Jimmy, again, based off of no tangible thing, but it seemed to me that Manafort would make the most sense in terms of someone that if Mueller clearly is looking to get more intelligence and information, He's not a blood relative, got fired from the campaign here, had a lot of other foreign interests here and entanglements that we already know of, and potentially more. Goes back to the Russians, both with the Ukrainian interests, which were really propped up Russian interests in the Ukraine as well. If anybody's been around the block, it might be willing to play ball, that wasn't concerned about upsetting the father-in-law or the father or whatever else. Paul Manafort kind of seems to fit the description.
And what I think you're referring to is they want to get as much as they can from Manafort, whether it's related to this or not, in order to then in order for them to then pressure him into cooperating with respect to the probe that's at hand. It's certainly a strategy, but as Bill said, you can't put that strategy into a search warrant application. There needs to be an articulable basis for you to convince a federal judge that there's probable cause to believe evidence of a crime will be found there. So he's clearly their favorite target for that type of thing, but again, they need to have probable cause to go into his house and conduct that search.
We've been talking about red lines. I talked in the first segment about North Korea and this president. He also talked about red lines in terms of the Russia probe was don't be touching or going into my finances. Over the weekend, Ron Rosenstein said, in effect, Mueller, has to basically ask, but in effect, he sees no reason to say no to anything and where he goes. How does it work, Bill, in terms of when they say, oh, it can't be a fishing expedition, but how can it kind of not be, in that beyond Russian interference in the election, it has to include finances in terms of, was there a quid pro quo? Did money change hands? If it did, what were the expectations for it? How far back did it go? Did this go back to not only when Trump was a private citizen, but does it go back to his casino holdings, who basically held the debt there? You're looking at Manafort, if he's $17 million with an IOU, to who and for what? And again, how did that play in? Were any of the same people in the room? I don't see how it's possible to do this investigation without going back years, without going to tax returns, without going into places where Donald Trump doesn't want it to go.
As hard as a pill as it is for the president to swallow, he's got to be made to understand that he doesn't get to draw the red line. Basically, this is Mueller's investigation. Mueller's been given a mandate as to what he's supposed to be doing, why he's appointed a special prosecutor. He's the one that determines the parameters of where he's going to go in this thing, not the president. Indeed, any attempt by the president to interfere with that would be viewed as obstruction. So the president's got to be very well counseled and follow the advice to sort of not take that approach.
Just on the obstruction front, if you could, we know politically, right now there's two different bills that have bipartisan support that would basically make it impossible for the president to fire Mueller or have him fired. Right. Is there also a legal barrier where, even minus that legislation, if he wanted, and say Rosenstein said, don't look at me, I'm not going to do it, he keeps going until he finds, like Robert Bork, back in the Nixon years, till finally someone says, I'll fire him, right? Or is he barred at all if it is legally at least viewed as obstruction? Forget even politically.
Well, you have to go back a little bit here, because it's not just let's say his firing of Mueller, but he fired Comey. And Comey was the director of the FBI. And they were looking at this. So if you take all of these isolated incidents that appear to be isolated, you put them all together and you get a picture emerges. So I'm not that sanguine to say, well, the president could never be charged with obstruction of justice. I think if the facts suggest it and the evidence warrants it, I think he certainly could be prosecuted. But getting back to your point, look, having done a lot of grand jury investigations in my time, I mean, it is a fallacy to suggest that a grand jury investigation is not a fishing expedition. Of course it is. They know what they're looking for, but they don't know where it is. So basically, they're going to go out and execute search warrants and try to subpoena documents and do everything they can, because they want to see what picture and story the documents tell them. They know what they think the story is, but thinking it and being able to prove it are two different things. So to suggest that, and by the way, the law doesn't say that you cannot conduct an investigation and subpoena documents and basically get search warrants, if you're fishing for evidence, because that's what a grand jury investigation is. It's fishing for evidence that will be sufficient to sustain a federal charge.
I mean, look at with the Clinton probe, right, where that started and where it ended. They weren't certainly thinking Monica Lewinsky at the beginning was where the thing was going to end. And I love Ken Starr, saying, hey, you've got to limit the scope here of the investigation. You think they've already seen his financial records when I say that, tax returns? You think
No.
they're already to that point or not?
I don't think so. And there are legal impediments to Trump firing him because, first of all, Comey, as the FBI director, he's there at the pleasure of the president, and he can be fired by the president with a phone call. Mueller cannot be fired by the president. He can be fired by the attorney general, however, for cause. So Comey can be fired for any reason or no reason by the president. This is a special prosecutor, well, akin to a special prosecutor, that can only be fired by the attorney general and for cause.
Jimmy, in terms of the timing, I had believed that at this point, beginning August, we wouldn't have seen a grand jury, we wouldn't have seen search warrants. Is it moving faster than a lot of people thought it would?
Mueller's got one job. You know, when Bill was an assistant United States attorney, he had his desk full of grand jury investigations, cases coming in all the time. I'm not saying it's not a big job, but here's a guy who has hired, you know, a top shelf team of lawyers, and they can move swiftly and they can move pointedly. And in terms of a fishing expedition, look, there are some limits here, but the limits that the president is trying to impose are far too restrictive. So there's nothing that he's looking at that shouldn't be looked at within the context of this quote-unquote Russian
like
probe.
Bill said, it's not up to him.
That's right.
All right, coming up next, how prosecutors can sit on evidence that could free defendants, and believe it or not, it's perfectly legal in the state of New York. This happened with this surveillance video we'll show you, and it kept someone out of prison after it was finally released. You'll want to hear this right after this.